Thank you to everyone for joining us today. My name is Alice O'Rourke. I'm the Assistant Curator here at Artcore, and I'm really delighted to be joined today by David Gilbert, who also works here at Artcore with me, and of course with Tony Kemplen, our artist who we've been working with, and who we'll be in conversation with today. So yeah, we're going to be talking about Tony's body of work called 52 Cameras in 52 Weeks. So this work's currently being exhibited online on our website, and it's also being shown as part of this year's Format Festival on their kind of online venue, New Art City. So we can link you to those so you can have a look throughout the talk today or afterwards. So for today, we've invited Tony to be talking in detail about that work and about his wider practice. He's been practicing art for many years, doing some really interesting projects and work. I guess to give you a bit of an overview, if you haven't been able to see the exhibition in advance, this work is comprised of a selection of photographs taken by Tony since 2010. And alongside these, there are also the corresponding cameras that we use to photograph the images. So yeah, I guess it's important to note that Tony's approach to image making is every bit as important as the kind of technical aspects as well. So that's why, yeah, the process is really apparent here in this work. Just as well, for those who don't know about Artcore, we're a contemporary art centre in Derby, home to a gallery, studios, workspaces, a shop, a soon-to-be cafe. So we work across lots of many different aspects, and we work with artists and communities, and deliver a really vast artistic and participatory programme. So have a look on our website if you're interested in the work that we're doing. We had originally invited Tony to present the work physically in the gallery over at our Albert Street site in Derby City Centre, but of course, as we all know, we were hit with the pandemic last year, and so we've had to shift and adapt. And so, yeah, we've been working with Tony to present this online, and hopefully in the future we will have a physical display sometime later this year. So of course you're all invited to come and see that work when we can do so safely. So that's my very brief introduction. So I'm going to hand over to Tony. It would be great if you could introduce yourself in your own words, talk a little bit about your practice, and yeah, thank you.
Right, yes, well, hello everybody. I'm Tony Kemplen. I seem to be darker on the screen at the moment. I don't know why that is, but so as Alice said, this was to have been a physical exhibition in Derby, and it's called 52 Cameras in 52 Weeks. It's actually, if I was to be accurate, it would be 522 cameras in 522 weeks. But so this is 10% of the project. I've been interested in photography since I was a child, and I've also been collecting cameras since I was, a primary school age. I'm not a systematic collector. I mean, you might unkindly maybe say I was a hoarder rather than a collector, but I tend to amass things, and cameras is one of the things that sort of interested me over the years. So I realised that I'd got quite a lot, and maybe it was time I started to use them rather than just have them on display or in boxes. So in 2010, I decided that I'd use a different film camera each week of the year, and I'd call it 52 cameras in 52 weeks. And I didn't actually know if I had 52 cameras, although I thought I probably did. And I certainly, didn't really know whether I'd see it through, but I did, and started acquiring a few more cameras along the way. Almost all of my cameras I've picked them up very sort of cheaply. They're from car boot sales, charity shops, or jumble sales in previous times. There's a handful that I've paid a few pounds for, but I'm more interested in the variety of them rather than them being in perfect pristine condition. So at the end of the first year, I built up a body of work, and I made a blurb book, which I then I brought I've just emailed Amateur Photographer magazine just to say I've done this. Maybe might make a letter page or something, or a letter on the letter page. And they got back in touch with me, and they ran a feature article about it, and they invited me to become a regular columnist. So I've now been writing a monthly column for 10 years about these cameras. So that was it, 52 cameras in 52 weeks. But then, of course, week 53 came round, and I had one or two more. So I thought, well, I'll carry on. And then once I got, into the second year of it, it just didn't really seem any logical option than to go for the decade. So I did that. And at the end of 2019, I'd worked out by then that there's 522 weeks in a decade rather than 520 because of leap years and extra days and things. So 522 cameras later, and I've stopped it. I mean, I've done some follow-on projects. So I mean, the cameras that I've used cover everything from ultra cheap giveaways to, I have got one or two more expensive ones, a Leica and a Contax and things like that. But it's more the being able to get some kind of image from the camera rather than getting too bogged down in the technicalities. Would you like me to say something about some of the individual cameras, or
I'd love to see some cameras, Tony. Yes, if you've got,
okay.
got some of the more curious ones around.
Okay, well, let's start off with a really simple one. This is what's called, it's probably a mirror image, isn't it? Anyway, it's a Super Snaps flicker. Super Snaps was a high street chain of they developed some printed films, and they often gave away freebies. So this one actually takes the 110 cartridges, those little tiny cartridges, which are actually, the cartridge is bigger than the camera. When you put one in, it actually sticks out the side. And you can imagine that doesn't give high-tech results. The results I got from it, there's 24 exposures on one of those cartridges. I took it on a trip to Barcelona, and so as you can see, of the 24 exposures, all but 23 failed, all but one failed. I'm not quite sure why that. I mean, so we've got the Sagrada Familia here, and we've got the living statues on the Ramblas, and somewhere down by the port, I don't know. Anyway, a lot of photos of Barcelona, but in fact, the only time it did fire was when I was finishing the film off. That's just a building near where I live. So, but I quite like the fact that not every time do I get a sort of technically good result. I like this when things go wrong, although I would quite like some of those to have worked out a bit better. There's another example of that. This is a Kodak VP, which stands for Vest Pocket. It was introduced around about the time of the First World War, and this particular example, I think, was made in about 1921. It belonged to my granddad, and they collapsed down very small, and they literally would go in your top pocket. They were sometimes called the soldier's camera because a lot of photos were taken during the First World War with these. So I took this one on a trip to Whitby, and this was one of the results I got there. Now again, I know you can't see the properly, but if you want to, you can look at it on the website. But here we've got Whitby Abbey, which was turned out to be due to a pinhole in the bellows of the camera. So when I was moving it around to find the subject, the sun came through and drew that sort of spectral line across there. So that's a little unexpected bonus, if you like.
I'm just thinking, Tony, with those images so far, both of the things that are really interesting about them are things that went wrong or mistakes, aren't they? And there's that kind of great tradition in artistic practice of celebrating the error.
Yes, yes.
So I kind of think about your project really from my perspective, I guess from a kind of critical or historical perspective, as kind of a conceptual project really, rather than a photography project at all. So I don't know what you think about that.
Yeah, well, I think it certainly didn't set out that way. It did become almost like a durational or an end-durational performance piece, where I was for a decade, my week was, I mean, obviously I had everything else going in my life, but this was probably one of the few regular select a camera on on a Friday, load it up, take some pictures over the weekend and develop it, and then the next week will come around. And so it was almost like a diary project as well, really. If I look through the books that I've made a book each year. It's sort of like a diary of what was happening in my life at the time. And but it didn't start off as a piece of conceptual art, although I can see why you can, why that why you picked up on that side of it. Yeah.
So have you got any? You've got some other cameras, I think, Tony, haven't you, handy as well?
There's quite a lot. Yeah, I mean,
let's see what else you've got.
There's another cheap and cheerful plastic one. This was one of the Holgers, which were quite popular 10 or more years ago, sort of low-tech Chinese cameras and they were made in a variety of colours. So sometimes the camera I'm using influences my choice of subject or the way I approach it. So I haven't got the picture to show you here, but the picture I took with this is of a blue chair and a yellow chair next to each other on outside a shop. So that's pretty it's pretty simplistic, with a blue and white camera and blue and yellow camera and blue and yellow trees. So another one here. Initially looked much more like a sort of 1990s camcorder. It's actually a 35mm half frame camera. So you get double the number of exposures that you would on a normal 35mm camera. And I quite like, particularly with half frame cameras, I quite like making little sequences of images. So the one I did with that is, here we are. That's some beach huts. That's at Hove, so I just sort of walked along the front there and took, I think there's 7 there, aren't there? I don't know, but there's 7 consecutive images taken with that camera. I got this one again. There's probably nobody here old enough to have used one of these, or possibly me. I don't know. These were in the 1950s and 60s, so they're still around in the 60s when I was a kid. One of the many Kodak Brony cameras takes square images on 120 film, and that was the photo taken with that, which the lens, it's not bad quality really. I know you can't possibly see that when I'm holding it up in front of here, but like I said, if you want to, you can look on the Artcore website. So these little the disc format cameras, which were introduced in I think 1981 and lasted about a decade, using little plastic discs that take 15 pictures, very, very small negatives, very poor quality. But I've used disc cameras on a number of occasions because they're quite good for if you're going to a gathering of some sort, a wedding or a leaving do, or in this case, a London meetup of the Film Photography Podcast, which is an American project that they had a meetup in London in 2012, I think. So this is just the 15 people who turned up. I quite like the way you sort of get a wheel there, images. The quality of, the produced well over 20 years ago, and so old film, particularly old colour film, loses its loses quality quite significantly. So but I mean that's all part of the appeal for me, I think. What else? Little tiny Minox spy camera, which I tried to use this in a sort of appropriate setting. So I went to the David Hockney exhibition at the Royal Academy a few years ago, where photography wasn't allowed, and I very sneakily and surreptitiously took some pictures of this. And I got another quite a nice one and taken in Tate Modern again, and it was in a room where photography wasn't allowed. But I managed to sneak up and get Damien Hirst's shark right in the mouth with this. So again, I haven't got a picture here to hold up, but it's on the website if you want. An underwater camera. I've got a number of underwater cameras. I don't really like beaches, and I wouldn't, you wouldn't take one in a public swimming pool anyway. So when I have used them underwater, I've my bathroom. So this is one me attempting to. Well, I wouldn't say I was trying to drown a rubber duck, but that was taken in my bath one evening with that. And again, this is another freebie from the Super Snaps people. This one used the 126 cartridges. Again, those are long obsolete, and it's another example of one where the cartridge is bigger than the camera, so a bit of it sticks out. And I took that on a trip to Venice, where I managed to get a classic tallest snap of St Mark's Cathedral, complete with my thumb in the obscuring part of the lens. So I didn't actually plan that, but it seemed sort of true to the low-tech nature of the camera.
For me, I think that's part of the beauty, Tony, that in an analog era, particularly where with some like I guess the Brony, for example, it was over 12 or 14 shots, 15 shots, something like that.
They came in a variety of. They would 8, 12, or 16 was the.
So instead of having that infinite possibility of just kind of snapping away on your phone or whatever digital camera and just discarding all the mistakes, actually you're kind of very limited. If you've got 15 shots, when you get it wrong, you just got to go for the best of the lot, not a bad lot, really, which is kind of a part of the beauty. One of the things that I think a lot of people remark on is when you look at photograph albums from the analog era, the quality of the color, for example, because you might get that kind of sort of faded color and whatever, which of course can be replicated with an Instagram filter, but it's not the actual coloration. The format, the old thumbs coming in, poor focus and so on, all these sort of accidental artifacts are actually part of the kind of whole the nature of the photograph, which has kind of disappeared. So I don't know. Do you take digital photographs? Would you?
I do. I mean, actually, in a funny way, it was getting my. I was a very keen photographer, when I was younger, and then once the family came along and work and things, I mainly just used the camera to for holiday and family snapshots and things, and then. I got my very first digital camera, I think, in 1999, a pretty basic one. But it was starting to use the digital camera that actually got me back into photography, and that was when I started using my film cameras again. So I use digital camera for photographing the cameras, and I use the camera on my phone more. I've got a DSLR, but I don't get it out very much. I mainly use the phone. So, but I like the way that using film slows you down, and you have only got, with some film formats, you've only got 8 exposures on a roll, so you do have to be more critical about what you decide to photograph, and then you can't take half a dozen and then look at them and decide which one you want. You have to wait until you've developed it. So, and then and sometimes you get complete technical failure, and in all of the 522 weeks, I can say it now because it's finished. I don't need to touch wood, but I've never actually had a complete failure where I got absolutely nothing. I had some quite near misses, like that one I showed you of the trip to Barcelona, where there's just one little image, but I never had a complete failure. So, but often the things that happen unexpectedly are as interesting as the planned things, if not more so. But yeah. Mm-hmm.
Tony, I wanted to. Hello. Hi. I just wanted to. I don't know if it's a question really or not, but it's something that's quite intrigued me in terms of, you know, moving from the films, that the analog side or the film side of things, to more digital. There's definitely pluses and minuses in terms of the benefits and not having the right benefits of using either or. But as a photographer and as your art, as your work, how do you feel about it? Like, what is your take on it? Bits on the lines of what David said. That do you still feel comfortable using phones and as your piece of art or piece of work?
I think I've used the digital camera and phone for documenting projects rather than necessarily for the work itself. Although having said that, I did make some work for an exhibition with an artist group called UK, who we've been together 20 odd years now. We had a show in Sheffield in 2019, which was tied in with the anniversary of the moon landings. Now my piece for that was a series of alternative moons, which were photos of the tops of red post boxes, and if you just flip them into negative and turn them into black and white, they look remarkably like moons. And I collected, well, I've got about 30 odd now, but I had 6 of them in this exhibition. So yeah, that was an example of using a digital camera or a phone camera to make artwork. So I don't feel don't really have any strong feelings about, you know, whether one's better than the other. I think when I'm using a film camera, then I'm thinking much more about what, you know, how it might look. And I suppose because you've got no option, you know, with a digital camera, you can see straight away how it looked. So you can even take a picture and then, you know, make adjustments or change the viewpoint to fit what you're looking for. Whereas with the film camera, you have to think much more at the time as to how it's going to how it's going to turn out. But no, I don't really feel, you know, one's good and one's bad. I use them both. Yeah.
Would you say, Tony, that your practice is I should say, is it fair to say that your practice is centered around like limitation and like sets of rules? Because I definitely get that feeling, and so maybe that's a good way of looking at like using both, you know, technologies across digital and analog, that as long as you've got this like set of rules to follow,
yeah,
it doesn't really matter what you use. It's
people have said that. I mean, it's not something that I'm not sort of particularly aware that I'm setting rules, but then when I actually step back and look at what someone's pointed out, then it often is the case. Yeah, with yeah, and having some sort of constraints as to what you can do is, I find it almost essential, really, because, you know, if you just where do you start? So having some sort of restriction is yeah, I find that helpful. Yeah, I think I produce better work if it's a fairly tight sort of brief, and, you know, if I'm just, someone says go and make me a piece of art or something, I'll probably, you know, spend far too much time fiddling around doing nothing.
Yeah, no, I think it's a really really fascinating aspect of your practice, and you know, even though like all of the kind of results of the photographs that you take are so varied and disparate, you know, it's really nice that there's this like underlying theme across all of them that you've like followed for the last 10 years. Yeah, I think I'm not sure if anyone has seen the works yet, but you can like certainly have a look on our website. But I'm really fascinated by this image of you in a hat as well, and how you bring that into the result. Could you talk to us a little bit more about that, and maybe in a better way for those who don't know?
Well, right from the very beginning of the project, I decided that I'd take a picture of myself in a mirror using the camera, so that one of the photos I had was actually of the camera in use. And I mean, sometimes that just wasn't technically feasible if it was a very, very basic camera and it was the middle of winter. So, it had to be something that I could use indoors. So it needed to be able to work in reasonably low light, or an outdoor reflective surface. So, and have on occasions taken a mirror outside, but, and there was it's been knocked down now, but there was a secondary school up the road where on the ground floor windows they had sort of mirrored inside. So if you looked and you got I presume it's to stop people peering in. So quite often on Saturdays when I was absolutely sure there was no one in the classroom, and if I had a camera that needed daylight, I'd be up there using the classroom window as a mirror. So I really hope there wasn't anyone on the other side. But anyway, so and at some point, and I don't think there was any particular reason for it, but I sort of started wearing a different hat to just to add a bit of variety, really. And not that I had a lot of hats, but there were a few that are sort of built up over the years from fancy dress and things like that. And so then that got a bit out of hand as well, and I started having to look for hats in charity shops and boot sales. I mean, they were 50p or £1, that sort of thing. So I don't know if there are certainly some on Instagram and on the Artcore website, but I've probably about 200 of the cameras with different hat combinations, which as an ensemble, they're quite interesting. I think it's I'm quite introverted, really, and I certainly don't like drawing attention to myself in public. So I would never wear those hats in public. I mean, the only hat I wear in the winter is just a simple black, beanie type hat to keep my ears warm. But in the comfort of my own bathroom usually, because that's where the mirror is, I can be a bit more flamboyant with my headgear. So yeah, that was a sort of side project, but quite an enjoyable one. And there's another, obviously if I'm going on holiday or going away somewhere, I take a camera with me, but most of the time I'm here in Sheffield, so I do tend to photograph the same things, over and over again. And there's a tree in our local park which I photographed again with probably about 150 different cameras. But that, as a probably got.
Oh wow!
That's 100 trees. 100 cameras and one tree. So so that's how the hats came about. And luckily, I've now got a couple of grandsons, so I've now got an excuse for getting the hats out, and so they are getting a second life now. But yeah.
That's brilliant. We do just have a question. Thank you, Sonia, for
Mm-hmm.
the chat box. Sonia was interested in hearing more about your collecting process.
Right, okay.
If there's a criteria which means that a camera would be rejected.
Mm-hmm. I've rejected very few. I'm okay. I'm not a systematic collector. So some people collect a particular make or of camera and go into great depth and get every single variety of it. I'm not like that at all. I'm much more of a sort of magpie, and I'll pick on anything. One of the main criteria, it has to be cheap. Car boot sales I've been going to car boot sales since the early 90s, I suppose. So I've got lots and lots of cheap and cheerful cameras from boot sales. Charity shops is another one. There's a few cameras that I've actually decided I'd like to get one for, and usually eBay's where I get those from. I have sort of more or less, I have kicked my eBay habit now, but I did go through a bit of an eBay phase in sort of the early part of the 10-year project. But I tend to go for the sort of slightly more, more unusual.
You were showing us the 8-lens camera before we.
Oh right, yes. I mean, this is an example one that It's called a Fuji Venture Cardia, which is a strange name. It's got 8 lenses on it. And there is a 16 lens version as well, which I've got and actually I use fairly often. And this was just developed for golfers to analyze their swing. So you get someone to stand with a camera and you'd do your golf swing, and they press the button, and you get 8 photos taken within. You've got a choice of speeds actually. Less than a second is and up to 2 seconds, which sounds a bit long for a golf swing, but I'm not a golfer. So I mean, I use with this one, you just press the button and it takes all 8 in quick succession. With the 16 lens one, there's the option to take an individual frame at a time. So I've made all sorts of collages and sort of panoramas made up of lots of individual pictures. I think with this one, this is an example that's in the exhibition taken with that. The camera around, so it's that's an 8 lens one. I've got plenty of cameras with 2 lenses, stereo cameras. I've got 1 or 2 with 3, some with 4. Got one with 9, 16's the most. So yeah, sort of unusual camera designs and purposes is something that I'm quite interested in.
I'm getting an Orwellian feel here. 4 lenses good, 2 lenses bad.
Oh yeah, yes.
So that's kind of evolution of the camera into these kind of very odd cameras with sort of specific purposes, which I guess are pretty, work of their time, like the 8 lens camera.
Yeah.
I don't know if anything like that exists anymore, or if it can be done.
I don't know. I mean, there's one. There was a. I haven't got one, and I'm not actively looking for one. But it was a camera made for dentists that had a fixed focal length lens, and it had built-in flash, and it was basically just set up so you put it on the front of someone's mouth and it photographed their teeth, and it wasn't, if you could photograph anything that was the size of your mouth and that distance away, but it was just so yeah. If I saw one of those in the charity shop, which is unlikely, I'd probably buy it and come up with some sort of project too.
I suspect they don't come up at car boots very often. Those
no. I think the golden era of the car boot sale for getting cameras is gone now, I'm afraid. But the time when digital photography was taking off, in the late 90s, early 2000s, and people were offloading their film cameras, and that was the time to grab a bargain. But yeah.
I remember reading a statistic back in it was 1998, which was the year of photography in the electronic image, one of the Arts Council's years off that they had in the run up to the millennium. Mm-hmm. And there was a statistic then which was that the average number of cameras in a British household was 5.
Right.
Which I thought was fantastic, which means that most of them are either broken or got used ones and shoved in a cupboard or something like that.
Yeah.
So they must be, I bet they're still out there, aren't they? Hiding in people's wardrobes or in the attic or whatever.
Yeah. Are they still, charity, when they're open, charity shops you still often find the sort of cheaper, film cameras from the 90s, 80s and 90s. But I think I've got enough of those really for the time being. And there are various other formats that have been and gone. I mean, there's the APS format, which that's an example of one there, but they're quite, they take a film which is, I think it's 20 millimeters wide as opposed to 35 millimeters. So they're quite, they do come even smaller than that. But again, that's a format that's now, that's not made anymore, and it's not, unlike some obsolete film formats where you can relatively easily reload an old camera with new film, that things like APS and 126 and the disc films, you can't, there's no easy way of making your own version of that. So with those formats, you're relying on old expired stock, which is, usually I've managed to get something out of it, but the quality can be, well, technically it's very poor, but it's that often adds, to the interest. But
so how do you get to process obsolete film formats? Do you have to do it yourself?
Yeah, I do all my own processing. I mean, I don't do any printing, so I develop the negatives and then I scan them and make a few corrections, nothing drastic, and then if I want prints, I upload them to one of the online services. But most of my images end up on Flickr or so most of them don't get printed. But developing them is easy. I mean, I say it's easy. I've been doing it since I was a kid. But I mean, you just need a developing tank and the chemicals and the reels that you put the film on. You can quite easily modify those to take the unusual widths and things like the disc. The disc is quite a rigid piece of plastic film, and so I just put that in the developing tank and gently agitate it, and it's quite. If you've ever developed your own film, you'll know that once you've done it 2 or 3 times, it's not difficult. It's and it's an awful lot cheaper than. I mean, you can get obsolete films processed by specialist firms, but they cost a lot of money. So I'm quite happy to do it myself. Yeah. So,
just wonder if anyone else has got any questions they wanted to chip in with.
Feel free to write it in the chat if you don't want to say that now. Cool. Was that that might have been my audio, sorry about that. I wanted to ask you, Tony, I mean, obviously you've photographed so much over the years and used so many cameras. Do you have a favourite camera, and do you have a favourite subject, and what are they?
Yeah, the favourite camera, there's probably a couple of options there, but I think I'd go for, I haven't got it with me, it's not actually one of those that's in this exhibition because it was something I wouldn't want to let out of my sight, but it's a Voigtlander Perkio, which so it's made in Germany in the early 1930s, and it takes a 127 film, and it's a folding camera, so it's a little bellows camera, but it's really neat, really nicely made, and it cost me £1 20 odd years ago in a camera shop that was selling off old stock. I mean, you'd have to pay over £100 for one of those if you wanted it on eBay, but it's not the price that's sort of interests me, but it's so that's a neat little one. Well, I've lost my thread now. I mean, I think the selection of cameras that are in the 52-week exhibition at Artcore, I mean, what I wanted was a little exhibition of cameras that might be of interest to people either who are camera enthusiasts or just like seeing a range of examples of the way a particular device has been designed over the years, and then 52 photos which are also hopefully quite interesting. So there are cameras that are arguably more interesting than the ones in the exhibition, but the photos I've taken with them have not been anything special. And there's probably some photos that I really like, but the camera's not very interesting. So it's a bit of a trade-off between and then, like I said, there's a few cameras that I wouldn't want to let out of my sight, so they've not made the cut. And that was a camera. And you asked me about subjects. Yeah, well, there's a tree, the tree in the park just behind the house, and the Park Hill Flats in Sheffield is a sort of well-known building, which is just in the city centre 2 or 3 miles away. So that's somewhere that I, photograph quite regularly. Sheffield University Arts Tower, probably one of my favourite buildings in the whole world. Really, that sounds a bit sad, doesn't it? But it's it's a fantastic early 1960s piece of sort of international style architecture. Similar to the Seagram building, but anyway, so that gets photographed quite often. And there's the Bishop's House, which is a Tudor half frame, half timber building in another local park just a mile or so away from here. So those are sort of subjects that crop up again and again.
Yeah, it feels like that feeling of something being familiar, or something that you experience quite a lot. we do have some other questions from some
Yep.
audience. So I'm wondering, do you have, and I might not be pronouncing this right, Werlisa camera? I hope I'm saying that right.
How do you spell that?
Werlisa, so it's spelled Werlisa.
No, I haven't got one of those. Sorry. Doesn't ring a bell, I'm afraid. Have you? I don't know who asked that, but have you got one? Were you wanting to?
Maybe let us know what kind of camera that is. She's also asked.
Sorry, did you want me to respond now to that?
Sure, yeah.
It's a camera that my father had, and I think it was obviously German, and there was a factory in Spain, which I think is where he probably got it from, but they're quite hard to get hold of, and I was just intrigued. A lot of our old family photographs were taken on
right. Yeah. No, I'm not familiar with that. I mean, I've got reference books. I could probably. Have you looked into it yourself? I mean,
I have. I was just curious whether you'd come across one in your great collecting.
No, I haven't. I mean, and I'm also well aware of the fact that although I've got a lot of cameras and I've seen a lot more, there'll be many more that whose existence I'm not aware of. So I'm afraid that's one of them. But yeah, I mean, let me know if you find out any more about it. Was it a?
Thank you.
Do you know what sort of film it?
I couldn't resist Googling it, Sonia. It looks very like Kodak Brony, actually. I wonder if it was kind of licensed or something like that.
Right. Have you got a picture of it? I can't. Were you looking at something then, or?
Oh, I just Googled it.
Oh, you Googled it?
All I can do. I wonder if it was a Kodak made under license or something like that.
There were, yeah. I mean, I don't know about this specific one, but there are lots and lots of examples of cameras that were, made by. I mean, one of my favourite brands, as it were, is the Benci, the Italian firm from Milan, who made about a dozen or so different very shiny aluminium bodied cameras from the sort of 40s and 50s, and they were so. I mean, for example, most of the Boots the Chemist, most of their own brand cameras in the 50s and 60s were Benci cameras with a different name on. So yes, that's possible that the Werlisa is an example of that sort of rebadging. Yes, I don't know.
Oh, thank you for that question, Sonia. Zahir would like to know, Tony, where do you see the future to be after the digital age? So yeah, in terms of cameras and photography, do you see anything changing or?
Well, I think people are moving more and more towards using their smartphones for taking photos, and I mean, I certainly, I use my phone for most sort of casual photography now. But yeah, I don't know if film will ever go completely extinct. Although I think it's probably, and it's nowhere near extinct at the moment. But I think there'll always be people who are interested in it. But in terms of digital cameras, it's not something I really know a great deal about. I mean, my DSLR is one that I got 13 years ago, and I do use it from time to time, but I'm not really particularly well up on the current digital cameras. So,
Thank you. And we
sorry. You miss that now physical, all these different cameras. You don't see much. You only see those SLR cameras.
Yes, in terms of variety of appearance, I mean, there are, I suppose there are two or three different styles of digital camera around, aren't there? But they do often look quite similar. Whereas, but mind you, I mean, in looking at my 522 cameras, of course, they cover a century or so of camera design. So it's not. I mean, I think in the 60s you had an awful lot of little 35mm cameras that looked very similar, and in the 30s you had a lot of little folding cameras that look similar. So maybe each era has its own look. But yeah, I like it's the variety of approaches to design and function of cameras. I just not in any great academic way, but I like the variety of the way things have been done.
When did you collect the last one, your camera?
Yeah. That's a good point. I did, yes. In the summer, when things briefly opened up and there were boot sales again, I did. You put me on the spot now. I did get one, but I can't remember what it was. It was something very. It was something very simple. Yeah, and I do. There's nothing that I'm actually. I mean, there are various cameras that if I saw, I would, at a reasonable price, I'd buy them. But I'm not actually on the hunt for any specific cameras at the moment. So I must brush up on the answer to that question about what my latest one was, because in case someone ever asks, yeah, sorry.
We have another question from Sonia, Tony, for you. He's interested to know about where you store your cameras.
Okay. Most of them are in boxes out of the way, which is a bit sad, isn't it? Probably I've got a couple of display cases with the more visually interesting looking ones, although I don't know if my wife would agree with that. Anyway, they don't dominate the house. I have, I do intend to, I did have quite a lot of them out in display cases, but then we had some building work done. They all got packed away and I've not quite got around to unpacking them again. But yeah, I'd like to have a couple of display cabinets where I could put the choice examples in, but the sad truth is that there's probably about 50 of them that are, well, it's probably about 50 on display, and then there's about 20 that I actually use fairly often, but other than that, they're in boxes. But I do go and, I do know vaguely what's in which box, so I do go and get them when I need them. But
Oh, that's great. Thank you, Tony. And then one of our last questions from Katrina. She said that she really loved the World War I camera that you showed us previously.
Oh, yeah.
And she was just wondering, was that from a car boot sale, or was that from a specialist auction? How did you come across that?
But this actual one belonged to my grandfather, not in the First World War, but so he and I guess he used it. I mean, some of the old family album photos were probably taken with this. These are very common, actually, very common indeed. You'd see them in the so-called antique centres quite often, and you can pick one of these up on eBay for I don't know, a few pounds really. I mean, they were made in the millions, and obviously a lot of them got lost or damaged along the way. But they're this is one of the ones that's relatively easy to get your hands on, and they're. I mean, I like these little. The 127 film format is smaller than 120, and they're quite small spools. They're thinner than 35 millimeters, so there are some quite neat little 127 cameras. Although the film is you can still get it, but it's quite expensive. It's it's a specialist thing, but yeah.
Oh, thank you for that, Tony. I mean we've been chatting for an hour now. So
we? Oh, right.
I'm really fast. This would be a good point. If anyone else has any other questions, feel free to unmute or pop a question in the chat as well. Hopefully, as David's mentioned in the chat, we will have an opportunity in the future this year to show these works, and so it would be great if you wanted to come and see them and ask us more about that. But yeah, would you like to end on anything, Tony? Is there anything that you haven't shared that you'd love to?
Well, like I said, I mean, I do. Yes, I hope the physical exhibition does happen, and also it'll be a different sort of experience. Well, obviously, it will be, but the way that we've had to present it on the website is the camera and the image are very much tied together. Whereas the idea with the physical show is that it'll be two separate exhibitions, really. There'll be the cameras displayed in one and the wall-mounted prints in another, and each one would just have a number by it, which would be the week number of the project that it was taken with. And there'd be, if you wanted to, there'd be information to read up more about the camera and things, but it would be the viewer's choice as to whether they might look at a camera and think, oh, that's an interesting camera, I wonder what photo it took, and vice versa, but it would be much less sort of upfront than it is in this web presentation. Yeah, let's hope that happens. But
well, we do just have one last final thought from Sonia. Do you take camera donations?
I do. I mean, I don't like to look at gift horse. No, that's the wrong phrase, isn't it? But yes, I mean, a number of quite a few of my cameras are ones that people have given to me. I'm often offered cameras that I've already got, in which case I try and be diplomatic and say that I don't need it. And also, I'd be embarrassed, or if someone offered me something really valuable, I think I would probably turn it down. But yeah, I mean, I'm always happy to to consider donations, as long as people are not offended if it's one I've already got and I don't want it.
Sonia, we can share Tony's website on social media if you've got any cameras. Well, thank you so much, everyone, for joining us today, and thank you, Tony, for sharing. Yeah, that all of your work is so fascinating, and we can't wait, hopefully this year, to share it all in the flesh.
Yes, that'll be good, won't it? But yeah, okay. Well, thanks. Thanks for inviting me, and thanks for coming. Bye. Bye.